Welcome back to the Media Guys Look Over show. And for our second video of the year is another Kamen Rider review. The predecessor of Build and the way more like successor of Ghost, Kamen Rider X-Ain, which after watching it, is probably my second favorite Kamen Rider series. To get into why, let's first talk about the plot. Kamen Rider X-Ain follows the story of Emu Hojo, an intern doctor for Saito University Hospital. Through a unique set of circumstances, joins the Cyber Rescue Division as Kamen Rider X-Ain, help fight off the deadly Buster virus, creating what are essentially living video game characters from the killing of people. Alongside him on this assignment are three other doctors: Surgeon Hiro Kagami or Kamen Rider Brave, Ex-Doctor Tyga Hanaya or Kamen Rider Snipe, and Coroner Kyrie Kujo or Kamen Rider Laser, who's a bike for some reason. These guys are all different levels of douchebags, which contrasts Emu and his much more nice guy personality, until the evil game CEO Kroto Dan or Kamen Rider Genom kills Tyga, which starts a second arc, where the Busters come back again, that way that they can create Kroto's ultimate game of Kamen Rider Chronicle, which is essentially Fortnite but in real life with Kamen Riders. But he never gets to see this dream achieved, as Kroto or Kamen Rider Paradox comes and kills him at the last minute before Emu defeats him. This leads into the final part of the show, with Kamen Rider Chronicle and the eventual arrival of Dan Masamune, Kroto's father, who's also the main villain, Kamen Rider Cronus, in order to rule the world, which Emu and friends stop from happening. Honestly, X-Aid probably has one of the best plots in Rider. I'm not a fan of the stuff that happens in the first arc, to be honest. Everything from episode 13 to the end is a banger, never a true drop in quality. Even all the stuff that Cronus does to keep himself from dying feels a lot more justified in how the events played out, which I can't say so much for his successor. Also, Kamen Rider Chronicle is such a cool concept, and even if I think the show could have done more with it, its introduction in general helped keep the story from stagnating like it might have done without this concept. But oh right, let's talk about the characters that make this story pretty cool. Emu is in my top 3 in terms of Rider protagonist. That's how good I think he is. While on the surface he's your basic nice guy main Rider who wants to make everyone smile, and while yes, that is true, the execution behind it is what makes his character so good. It's mainly because even though he keeps his outlook of being a nice guy, there's definitely so much more growth there than usual. This can be mainly seen in his relationship to the other three main riders, of Hiro, Tyga, and Kyrie, who at the beginning of the series are all douchebags to him because of their own personal baggage, which has an effect on Emu. Emu does not have the ability to be able to trust any of them because they will betray him on a dime, which can be most majorly seen in episode 10, where Emu is encouraged by the guy who inspired him to be a doctor to actually work with them. Emu having to go down to their level in order to make that work, because of the fact he just can't trust them. But eventually Emu is able to get the riders to get over their personal baggage and work with him properly, especially after Kyrie's death. And seeing how happy Emu is that he finally is friends with Hiro and Tyga is cool, even if the two of them won't acknowledge it. Then we also have his dynamic to our three villainous Kamen Riders of Dan, Parado, and Masamune. They all share a thing in common, that being a disrespect of life, as three of them all just saw people's lives as something they could toy with or end for their own personal gain. Emu utterly loathes with his entire being. Scenes such as when he literally almost kills Parado and make him understand the pain of death, and the scene where he literally gets into an argument with Dan over the fact how much he disrespects life itself, really drives this part of Emu's character and makes me like him all the more. It's just the fact that this guy, despite being how nice of a person he is, still has breaking points, which the show continually touches on over and over again, to make him a much more interesting character to watch on screen than if he didn't have all these breaking points, where you could tell he was fed up with the events going on. But Emu wouldn't be such a good protagonist if he didn't have good characters to bounce off of. So let's start with Hiro. While I don't have the same level of praise for Hiro as I do for Emu, he's still a good character. His motivation for being a rider and destroying Busters is because his girlfriend was one of the first two people to contract the Buster virus, and she died from it. This event made him a lot more of a cool person, being super unpersonal with his patients, even encouraging Emu to be the same way, even though Emu has this whole mentality of being super personal with his patients, and trying to make sure they feel the best that he can be. But this is until Hiro eventually starts to respect Emu's methods, even using it himself one time, when Emu couldn't use them because of the fact he was acting weirdly. We'll get back to why Emu acts weirdly. All of this is until, well, he learns that he can bring his girlfriend back to life, thanks to Cronus. So he decides to betray the team for a bit. This is all until, well, Tyga gets fatally wounded, and Cronus, like the douchebag he is, gives Hiro a terrible ultimatum. Either A, he helps Tyga come back to life and not die from his wounds and never be able to see Saki again. Or he B, lets Tyga die and does be able to see Saki again. But Hiro, as a surgeon, as a doctor, won't let someone die. Despite the bad blood he had towards Tyga for believing that he's the reason she died, he wasn't going to let him die because of it. And the scene where he comes back to Cronus and where Cronus just destroys Saki in front of him and then Hiro just starts crying, like, that just got to me, man. And it just shows why he's such a cool character to me. Like, again, he's not my favorite character, especially in terms of secondary writers, but he's a good character in his own right, and I like him. Let's get on to Tyga now. Tyga is another good character to add to X8's roster. Tyga is an ex-doctor, more specifically a radiologist, having lost his license due to his failure to save Hiro's girlfriend, Saki. When the series starts, he comes in with a negative mentality of believing he's the only Kamen Rider needed, because, well, unlike the others, he has nothing to lose, as he basically believes outside of being a Kamen Rider, he doesn't really matter as a person. That's until he meets Nico. Some girl decides to start hanging out with Tyga because she wants him to beat up Emu because she lost a game of Tekken against him 6 years ago. And unlike the Fortnite joke I made about Kamen Rider Chronicle, that actually happens in the story. Tekken 7 somehow, even though the flashback would take place in 2011. Anyway, it's kind of crazy how much of a better character Tyga becomes once they give him a daughter, essentially. Like, he starts to lighten up a lot more because Nico makes fun of how serious he is all the time. And now Tyga starts to get overprotective over her by saying things like, she's my patient, whenever the other writers, mainly Hiro and Emu, try to help her out. Helped even more by the fact that Nico becomes one of the ride players of Kamen Rider Chronicle, which adds another interesting thing to the dynamic. So in general, while Tyga was also not a favorite at the beginning, he later became one, as I consider him even better than Hiro. Also, Nico's the best female Kamen Rider. I don't care if Toei counts her as one or not. She is to me. Let's go to Kyrie now. Let's give it up for our resident bike, Kyrie. Kyrie's whole deal is that he's a pathological liar, mainly because he believes that being honest is what got his friend killed. But due to being friends with Emu, he eventually learns he doesn't have to lie to try and protect himself from his actions, and he learns he can be honest with others. Which he learns before getting murdered by Kroto because he got too close to revealing the truth behind Zero Day. And this is where the issue comes in with my opinion on him. Well, yes, Kyrie is a fun character. A lot of what makes him important is less what he does himself and more how what he does affects people. Like, for example, Kyrie comes up with a way to be able to reprogram bugsters. That way they don't kill people. Which that's important as a plot point, but more in how it's used by Emu than it is by himself. Even when Kyrie comes back as a bugster in episode 34 after dying in episode 12, he still sadly doesn't get much to do. Like, they have him pretend to be evil, but that lasts for an episode and a half before, well, he betrays Cronus, help Emu and the gang, and while it's fun to have him around because of how charming his laid-back personality is, the show just doesn't really have room for his character at that point. So there's 9 episodes left to finish the story, and well, that time is focused on the other characters, which is just naturally going to happen. Still like him though, but let's get on to his killer, Kroto. Kroto Dan is probably one of my favorite villains in Kamen Rider. He starts the show out as a supposed nice CEO of a game corporation. Before revealing himself to be a power-hungry man, he wants to be seen like a god for his genius. So like most CEOs of video game companies, the main thing that makes him a great villain is his personality. His god complex is just really fun to see on screen, even in the second half where they play it up a bit, not to the point where it ever stops being charming to me. I also like how he functions as a foil to Emu, with his utter lack of respect for human lives as he used the Bugster virus to put people in danger. That way he can create his ultimate game of Kamen Rider Chronicle. Alongside the fact that this man literally created a way to come back to life, alongside giving himself extra lives, which fits in the face of all of Emu's efforts to save people, which can be seen at its best in episode 31, where the two of them decide they'll never see eye to eye, as they say catchphrases that contradict one another. He's just a really fun character overall, especially due to the fact that he stays a villain even when he has to help the heroes, as essentially their slave. Let's get on to the race of beings Kroto turned himself into, the Bugsters, with special mention to his killer, Parada. The Bugster virus is a virus created in computers due to the events of Y2K, and this virus, when it affects people, it creates Bugsters, which are essentially living video game characters, with all the Bugsters we see in the series being the main villains from games within the X8 universe created by Kamen Corp. The first person to be infected with the Bugster virus was Emu by Kroto, because Kroto felt threatened by kids' game ideas. Did I mention how straight up evil Kroto is? Anyway, this infection created Kroto. Kroto's entire deal is that he just wants to play games, as he was created through Emu's desire to have someone to play games with, which originally had Kroto appear as a split personality for Emu before Kroto was released. The relationship that Kroto and Emu holds is one of my absolute favorite parts of the series, not only because the idea of a character with a split personality is cool to me, it's mainly because Kroto introduces the really interesting idea of the psychology behind the Bugsters, as all Bugsters want to do is play out their game, which Kroto wants to do by being able to play around with Emu, as that's his purpose. The whole reason he even cares about Kamen Rider Chronicle being created is that so the Bugsters can continue having fun, even to the point of killing humans. Kroto as a video game character doesn't have a problem with, because he doesn't value the idea of human life being an irreplaceable one-time thing, because you don't die in games for real, you just come back after a while. That's until Emu accidentally makes Kroto human kinda, using the power of reprogramming. After Kroto fuses with Emu again, which makes Kroto slowly realize the importance of life, which is solidified in him once Emu kills him to save Nico. After coming back, Kroto's terrified and realizes how straight up immoral everything he did was, and decided to join Emu, finally on the same side in valuing life. Which some would argue was done maybe a bit too fast, but it was still a good arc. It helped to make Emu a much more interesting character who's dynamic with Kroto. The fact that I think Kroto is just a fun character. There are also the other three important Bugsters who have less to say about. Poppy is the main sister of the gang, and she is fine as a character, but just doesn't offer much, especially compared to Kroto, even though she also becomes a Kamen Rider. There's also Graphite, which for a character who's so tied into Tyga and Hiro's arc, he really doesn't do much in the story. He's only really memorable for the fact he went out in a cool way, and also he is a dragon, so he's absolutely cool, even if he has very little personality. There's also Lovelyka, who did not need to exist and isn't fun enough to make up for it. He also reminds me of that one guy from Fairy Tail. Anyway, let's get to the final character, Cronus. While Masamune really kinda comes out of nowhere in terms of being the final villain, and he essentially has the same motivation as his son Kroto, he makes up for all that with his presence. The minute he comes in as Cronus, who has the power to stop time, the games are done, and he's pretty intimidating. Also, the touch of him literally calling the characters by their form names just kinda makes the douchebaggery even more potent. And due to the fact that all the writers use forms based off of games created by Kamen Corp, uses the idea that Masamune only sees the writers as products, which makes him even more hateable. Just wish he was part of the show more, because again, him being the final villain just kinda came out of nowhere, to be honest. He pulls it off well enough. So with another video ending, I just gotta say, I love X8. From the cool plot to the cool characters and even the aesthetics, Bandai was really in their bag here when it came to the video game homages, like the shots, the device they used to transform are. Which is Kroto's 2-in-1 puzzle and fighting game, and X8's Mighty Brothers Double X Sword, and it's a reference to the Mario Brothers, another cool way to show off the split personality thing of Emu, with the orange X8 being Kroto and the blue X8 being Emu. This all to say, go watch Kamen Rider X8, as a show that warmed into my heart, coming all the way to be my second favorite Rider season overall. See you in another review where I hope to review something that I'm this positive about once more.